What happens when the final wishes of a monarch who ruled for 7 decades are revealed, and the messenger is someone steeped in controversy? The royal family gathers in Buckingham Palace's grand drawing room, faces stoic, yet betraying the weight of unspoken questions. Why did Queen Elizabeth II entrust Prince Andrew with the responsibility of reading her will? What secrets, surprises, and tensions lie within her meticulously crafted final directives? As the words of the late Queen unfold, alliances will be tested, and the very future of the monarchy hangs in the balance. The soft light of the morning spilled through the tall windows of Buckingham Palace's grand drawing room, casting faint shadows over its ornate furniture and gilded frames. The air was heavy, not just with the weight of history that these walls carried, but with the knowledge that a momentous occasion was about to unfold. Each family member, dressed in muted tones of black and navy, sat scattered across the room, their postures stiff, their expressions guarded. Despite their shared loss, the emotional distance between them was palpable. The envelope sat on the table like a silent specter, its seal unbroken but already exerting its power. All eyes, whether openly or subtly, drifted to it. This wasn't just a legal document. It was a roadmap left by the late Queen Elizabeth II, a woman who had ruled with unwavering strength for 7 decades. What lay within could shape not only the future of the monarchy, but the very fabric of their family. At the center of the room, Prince Andrew stood awkwardly, his hands clasped behind his back. For a man used to commanding attention, this was a rare moment where all eyes on him felt less like admiration and more like scrutiny. Andrew's selection to read the will had been a surprise to many, perhaps even to himself. It was a task steeped in symbolism and responsibility, one that required dignity and gravitas, qualities that some whispered he lacked. The room buzzed with an undercurrent of tension, a quiet hum of unspoken questions and assumptions. Why had the Queen chosen Andrew for this role? Was it an olive branch, a message of trust, or perhaps an act of redemption? Each family member had their theories, though no one dared voice them. King Charles, seated closest to the envelope, maintained his usual stoic demeanor. His jaw was tight, his lips pressed into a thin line, betraying little of his thoughts. Beside him, Camilla sat with her hands neatly folded, her gaze fixed firmly ahead. Across the room, Prince William exchanged a brief look with Catherine, their unspoken communication clear. Stay composed. On the other side, Princess Anne sat with her characteristic air of calm, though her sharp eyes missed nothing. Even in silence, she was a stabilizing force, a contrast to the tension radiating from the others. Andrew cleared his throat, breaking the fragile quiet. The sound echoed in the vast room, causing a few heads to turn. He stepped forward, hesitating briefly before picking up the envelope. His fingers lingered over the Queen's seal, the delicate red wax unbroken. For a moment, he seemed frozen, as if the weight of his mother's trust and the eyes of his family were pressing down on him simultaneously. With a deep breath, he broke the seal. The sound, a soft, deliberate crack, reverberated in the stillness. He unfolded the first page, the crisp parchment rustling faintly. His voice, steady but with an edge of hesitation, filled the room. I, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor, Queen of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, do hereby declare my final wishes and directives. The opening words carried an almost eerie presence, as if the Queen herself were speaking through her son. Andrew paused, his eyes scanning the page. For a moment, he seemed to collect himself, and when he continued, his voice was smoother, more measured. To my beloved family, whose strength and unity have been the cornerstone of this monarchy, I extend my deepest gratitude. Through trials and triumphs, you have upheld the values we hold dear. It is my sincere hope that you will continue to do so. Together. The Queen's words, warm yet purposeful, hung in the air. Some in the room shifted in their seats, the mention of unity striking a chord. Unity, after all, had been a fragile concept for this family, often more performative than genuine. The weight of her expectation was undeniable, a challenge that each of them would interpret in their own way. Andrew glanced up briefly, his eyes scanning the room before returning to the document. The next part was more personal, addressed to the family as individuals. It was here that the stakes began to rise. For my dear son Charles, the responsibility you now bear is one of great significance. You are the keeper of this legacy, the bridge between the traditions of the past and the demands of the present. Windsor Castle will remain in your care as it has been for centuries, a symbol of continuity and stability." Charles gave a small nod, his expression betraying no emotion. This decision was expected, and it reaffirmed his role as the monarch, the anchor of the family. Andrew continued, his tone slightly sharper. "To my daughter Anne, whose unwavering dedication has been a source of great pride, I entrust Sandringham Estate. Your connection to this land and your ability to nurture its significance make you its rightful steward." This was the first moment of visible reaction. Anne blinked once, her composed face revealing the faintest flicker of surprise. Sandringham, a cornerstone of royal life, was not traditionally assigned outside the reigning monarch. Across the room, Charles shifted in his seat, his brow furrowing ever so slightly. Andrew's lips tightened briefly, but he pressed on. "Balmoral Estate," he read, "will hold a shared purpose. Its legacy as a familial retreat shall continue, with stewardship divided among several of my children." This decision drew immediate murmurs, soft but unmistakable. Charles glanced sharply at Andrew, while Princess Anne tilted her head, her expression inscrutable. Balmoral had always been deeply personal, a place imbued with memories of summers spent together. Splitting its care felt both symbolic and divisive. Andrew paused again, his hands tightening slightly on the parchment. The atmosphere in the room grew heavier, each revelation a quiet blow to the family's expectations. As Andrew's voice carried through the room, the air grew heavier with each revelation. The Queen's words, though written in her familiar measured tone, seemed to take on an added weight when spoken aloud by her son. It was not just the content of the will, but the implications it carried for the family and the monarchy itself that created the thick tension enveloping the room. Andrew adjusted the papers in his hand, the faint rustling sound echoing in the otherwise silent chamber. His pause was deliberate, perhaps to steady his voice or perhaps to give the family time to absorb what had just been revealed. The shared stewardship of Balmoral was not just unexpected, it was a departure from tradition. A quick glance around the room confirmed what he already knew. This decision had unsettled some, if not all, of those present. The family's reactions were subtle but telling. Charles's face, though outwardly composed, betrayed a flicker of disapproval. The Queen's intentions were clear, but the practicalities of managing a shared legacy between multiple parties could not be ignored. Anne's expression, ever reserved, carried a glint of quiet curiosity. For her, Balmoral was more than just property. It was a repository of memories, of summers spent walking the expansive grounds with her mother. Andrew, however, avoided meeting anyone's gaze, focusing instead on the document before him. His voice softened slightly as he moved on to the next portion. "To my grandchildren, who represent the future of this family and the monarchy, I leave not only the symbols of our heritage, but the guidance necessary to carry them forward." The room grew quieter still. These words were not unexpected, but the Queen's ability to convey warmth and purpose in her writing stirred something in each person seated there. Andrew's tone, though steady, carried a slight edge of hesitation as he continued. "Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, has exemplified the qualities that ensure the monarchy's enduring presence. To her, I entrust the Vladimir tiara, a symbol of grace and continuity. It is my belief that she will wear it with the dignity and strength it represents." Catherine, seated beside William, inclined her head ever so slightly, her expression one of quiet gratitude. The tiara, one of the Queen's most iconic pieces, was more than an heirloom. It was a message, a nod to Catherine's future role as Queen Consort. William's hand briefly brushed against hers, a silent gesture of solidarity. Andrew hesitated for a fraction of a second before continuing. "To Princess Charlotte, whose spirit and potential I see as vital to this family's legacy, I leave several pieces from my personal collection. These are not merely adornments, but reminders of the values we hold dear." Charlotte's inclusion brought a faint smile to a few faces. The Queen's vision was clear. The younger generation was not only being entrusted with treasures, but with the responsibility to uphold the family's traditions. But as Andrew turned the page, the room seemed to tense again. He took a deep breath, aware of the weight of the next words. "To my grandson, Prince Harry, who has served with courage and honor, I leave a ceremonial sword once belonging to King George VI. This gift is a symbol of service, dedication, and the ties that bind us, even in times of distance. The mention of Harry caused a ripple of unease. Though he was not present, his name carried significant weight in the room. The sword, steeped in history, was a meaningful gesture. Yet its interpretation was open to debate. Was it an olive branch or a subtle reminder of what had been left behind? William's expression darkened briefly, his jaw tightening before he quickly masked his emotions. Anne shifted slightly in her chair, her gaze fixed on Andrew. For his part, Andrew seemed to quicken his pace as though eager to move past this delicate subject. The Queen's will reflects her steadfast commitment to this family and its future, Andrew said, his voice regaining some of its earlier steadiness. Her decisions were made with care, and her words were chosen to guide us in the years to come, but the tension in the room was far from resolved. As Andrew continued to read, detailing provisions for the management of other royal estates and properties, it became clear that the Queen's vision extended beyond mere inheritance. Her intent was to modernize the monarchy while preserving its traditions, a delicate balancing act that not all present fully embraced. Charles's silence grew heavier with each revelation, his expression increasingly difficult to read. The Queen's emphasis on shared responsibility, on openness and accessibility, resonated with some and rankled others. The room, though outwardly calm, felt like a taut string, ready to snap at any moment. As Andrew read the final lines of this portion, he placed the papers down carefully. His hands, which had been steady throughout, trembled slightly as they left the documents. The family sat in silence, the enormity of the revelations sinking in. For some, the Queen's words offered clarity and purpose. For others, they stirred unease and doubt. Anne was the first to break the stillness, her calm voice cutting through the silence. "Mother always had a way of reminding us what truly mattered," she said, her words deliberate but gentle. Her gaze moved around the room, lingering briefly on each face before settling back on Andrew. "We would do well to remember that." Her words, though simple, carried a weight that none could dismiss. The room remained steeped in silence, the kind that carried the weight of unspoken words and unresolved emotions. Andrew's hands lingered on the edge of the table, his fingers twitching slightly as though reluctant to move on. The Queen's words, so carefully chosen and full of purpose, still hung in the air, intertwining with the thoughts and judgments forming in the minds of each family member. Anne's composed statement, though delivered with the utmost grace, seemed to settle uneasily with some. Charles, who rarely indulged in outward displays of emotion, shifted in his seat, the faintest crease forming on his brow. Across from him, William appeared pensive, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him, while Catherine's reassuring presence beside him anchored the moment in quiet solidarity. Andrew cleared his throat, pulling himself upright. The next section of the will lay before him, its words carefully penned by a woman who had carried the weight of the crown for over 70 years. As he began to read, his voice carried a renewed sense of obligation. "The continuity of our legacy depends not only on the preservation of our history, but on our willingness to adapt to the needs of a changing world." Andrew began, his voice steady but solemn. "I have given much thought to how our estates and properties might best serve the crown and its people." His words signaled a shift, one that drew the family's attention back to him. It was no longer about individual inheritances or symbolic gifts, but about the Queen's broader vision for the monarchy's future. "Balmoral Estate," Andrew read, pausing briefly to glance around the room, "has long been a sanctuary for this family, a place of respite and reflection. It is my wish that this sanctuary remains so, but also that it opens its gates to those who seek to understand the legacy it represents. Its stewardship will remain divided among my children, with each bearing responsibility for its care and preservation." The room's temperature seemed to drop slightly, the Queen's decision still rippling through their collective consciousness. The idea of Balmoral being shared among multiple heirs was bold, progressive even, but its implications were fraught with complexity. Charles's lips pressed into a tighter line, his silence growing heavier. Anne, ever the composed one, gave a single, almost imperceptible nod, as though silently accepting the challenge ahead. Andrew continued, now reaching the provisions for Sandringham. "Sandringham Estate," he said, his tone softening, "represents a deeply personal connection to our family's traditions. Its stewardship, entrusted to my sister Anne, reflects her unwavering dedication and her ability to maintain its historical significance. A flicker of emotion crossed Anne's face, subtle yet undeniable. The weight of responsibility was nothing new to her. But this particular decision held a deeper meaning. It was a testament to her years of quiet service, a recognition that stood apart from the formalities of royal titles and fanfare. But the moment was short-lived, as Andrew turned to the next section, his voice growing steadier. In considering the future of our monarchy, it is essential to prepare the younger generation for the roles they will inherit. To this end, I have left detailed guidance for those who will carry the mantle of this legacy. The words brought a subtle shift in the room's energy, particularly for William and Catherine. They exchanged a glance, one filled with the silent understanding of their shared responsibilities. Andrew's voice softened as he read the Queen's message to their children. To my great-grandchildren, I leave not only the symbols of our heritage, but the wisdom I have gained throughout my life. Prince George, as the future king, it is vital that you balance the weight of your title with the humility to learn from those you serve. Remember always that the crown's strength lies in the respect of its people. A slight tremor in Andrew's voice betrayed the personal impact of these words. Though distant from George in terms of lineage, the Queen's advice carried a universal truth that struck a chord even in him. To Princess Charlotte, Andrew continued, I leave a collection of jewels from my personal estate. These are symbols of the enduring legacy of this family, reminders of the strength and resilience that women in this line have embodied. The mention of Charlotte brought a faint smile to Catherine's lips, though her eyes shimmered with the unspoken weight of what the future held for her children. For Prince Louis, I leave a letter written in my own hand. Though your path may not carry the same weight of responsibility, your role within this family is no less significant. I hope you will find strength and purpose in being a source of support and unity for your siblings. Andrew's voice grew quieter as he finished, his words carrying a reverence that none could ignore. The Queen's care in addressing each of her descendants was unmistakable, a reflection of her enduring love for both her family and the monarchy. As Andrew placed the papers back on the table for a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. The Queen's vision was becoming clearer, her intentions unfolding like the pages of a well-written story. But with each new revelation, the balance between tradition and progress became more delicate, more tenuous. Charles finally spoke, his voice calm but edged with authority. It is clear that Her Majesty's wishes are deeply considered, he said, his eyes scanning the room. Our challenge will be to uphold her legacy while navigating the realities of the present. The statement carried weight, its implications undeniable. As Andrew prepared to resume, the family sat in silence, the gravity of their roles pressing down on them like the ornate ceilings above. The room, though outwardly calm, was alive with thoughts and emotions, each person grappling with what had been laid before them. Andrew picked up the next set of papers, his fingers brushing against the thick parchment, as if he could feel the significance of the words before they were spoken. The weight of the task seemed to settle more heavily on him now. He paused, briefly glancing around the room. The family's faces were still masks of composed dignity, but the tension was undeniable, lurking just beneath the surface. When Andrew began again, his voice carried a faint tremor. As we move forward, the strength of this family will depend not only on its unity, but on its ability to embrace change. The responsibilities I assign here are not merely duties, but opportunities to build bridges where there have been divides. His words hung in the air, their pointed relevance unmistakable. Each family member understood the implications, though none said a word. Andrew cleared his throat and continued. To my son Andrew, he read, the tone of his voice growing softer, I entrust the duty of preserving our history, a task that requires both care and humility. Though public roles may shift, the contributions to this family and its legacy remain vital. A faint murmur stirred in the room. The words, carefully chosen and deliberate, acknowledged Andrew's place in the family while subtly addressing the controversies surrounding him. His face remained unreadable, though his posture stiffened slightly, a flicker of discomfort betraying his otherwise calm exterior. Charles's gaze lingered on Andrew for a moment before shifting back to the table in front of him. Across the room, Anne's expression softened, her innate understanding of the Queen's intent evident in her steady gaze. Andrew moved on, his voice regaining some of its earlier steadiness. To Prince William and Catherine, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, I entrust not only the properties and titles associated with your roles, but the responsibility of leading the next generation. Your work represents the balance between tradition and progress, a bridge that is essential for the survival of this institution. William inclined his head slightly, his expression one of quiet determination. Beside him, Catherine's features were composed, but there was a glint of resolve in her eyes. The Queen's faith in their abilities was evident, and with it came an undeniable weight. Andrew turned to the next page, pausing for a brief moment before speaking again. To my grandson Harry, he began, his voice dropping slightly, I leave a piece of this family's history, a reminder of where he comes from and the values we hold dear. The ceremonial sword of King George VI, a symbol of service and resilience, is entrusted to him with the hope that he will always remember the strength of his heritage. The mention of Harry's name brought a noticeable shift in the room. William's posture stiffened, and Charles's expression darkened ever so slightly. The sword, steeped in historical significance, was a gesture of both inclusion and quiet admonishment, a complex message that would undoubtedly carry weight far beyond the object itself. Andrew's tone grew quieter, almost reflective, as he read the next line. It is my hope that this gift will serve as a bridge between the past and the future, reminding him that while paths may diverge, the bonds of family endure. For a moment, the room seemed frozen, the Queen's carefully crafted words stirring a mixture of emotions. The tension was palpable, each member of the family processing the message in their own way. Anne, ever the steady presence, allowed her gaze to linger briefly on Charles before returning to Andrew. As for Archie and Lilibet, Andrew continued, his voice steadier now, their place within this family is as significant as any. To them I leave the hope of a future built on understanding and mutual respect. Though they may reside far, they remain part of our legacy. The words were simple, yet their impact was profound. Meghan's absence in the will remained unspoken, yet the deliberate inclusion of her children carried its own message. It was a gesture of reconciliation, albeit one fraught with complexity. Andrew lowered the papers momentarily, taking a deep breath. The task of reading these words, of being the one to voice the Queen's intentions, was clearly taking its toll. The family sat in silence, each processing the intricacies of what had been said. Anne's calm voice cut through the quiet. Mother understood the importance of addressing these matters openly, even when they were difficult, she said, her words measured and deliberate. Her vision, as always, reflects her strength. The subtle compliment did not go unnoticed. Anne's ability to acknowledge the Queen's wisdom while subtly reminding the family of their shared responsibilities was a skill few could match. Charles nodded slightly, though his expression remained guarded. Andrew resumed, his voice firmer now. The estates and titles I have assigned are not merely inheritances, but tools to shape the future. Balmoral, Sandringham, and Windsor represent more than history. They are opportunities to engage with the people and strengthen the connection between this family and those we serve. The Queen's emphasis on modernizing the monarchy, on making its legacy accessible to the public, was clear. But not everyone shared her vision. Charles's silence spoke volumes, his resistance to the idea of opening royal properties evident in his tight jawline. As Andrew approached the end of this section, he paused once more, his gaze sweeping the room. The Queen's words had done more than distribute wealth and responsibilities. They had laid bare the complexities of their family dynamic. It was a reminder of what they had lost and a challenge for what lay ahead. The silence in the room deepened, the weight of the revelations settling over them like a heavy cloak. For all the Queen's wisdom and foresight, the true test of her legacy would not be in her words but in their actions. Andrew folded the papers carefully, his hands steady despite the storm that brewed just beneath the surface. Anne broke the silence once more, her voice soft yet resolute. There is much to consider, she said, her gaze steady. But for now, we honor her intentions. It was a simple statement, yet it carried the weight of a command. The family nodded in quiet agreement, their thoughts their own as they prepared for the next stage of the reading. The Queen's words, though carefully chosen, were only the beginning. The decisions they would make in the days to come would determine whether her vision could truly endure. As the evening light cast a golden hue through the windows of Buckingham Palace, the weight of the day's revelations settled heavily over the family. The grand drawing room, once filled with quiet murmurs and restrained tension, had fallen into a contemplative silence. Andrew sat with the final set of papers before him, his shoulders slightly slumped under the burden of what was to come. The Queen's voice, though carried through Andrew's measured tones, had been a constant presence throughout the reading. It was as if she were still guiding them, her words carefully chosen to nudge them toward a future she had envisioned but would never witness. Andrew lifted the final document, his hand steady now, his voice regaining some of its earlier authority. "The legacy of this family," he began, "has always been shaped by our ability to endure. Through every trial, we have relied on one another and on the principles that define us. As this chapter closes, I leave you with these final reflections." The room grew even quieter, the family leaning in slightly, their attention fixed on Andrew. This was the moment they had all been anticipating. The Queen's final words, her last chance to speak directly to them, to shape their path forward. Andrew's voice softened as he read on. "To Charles, my eldest son, you are now the steward of this great legacy. You have borne the weight of expectation your entire life, and now it is yours to carry fully. Lead with compassion, with wisdom, and with an open heart. The strength of the crown lies not in its history alone, but in its ability to inspire trust and loyalty in those it serves." Charles inclined his head slightly, his expression unreadable, but the faintest flicker of emotion crossed his face. For decades he had prepared for this role, yet these words from his mother carried a gravitas that no amount of preparation could diminish. Andrew turned the page, his voice unwavering. "To William, you are the bridge between tradition and the future. Your role is not only to preserve what has come before, but to adapt it to the needs of a changing world. You and Catherine hold the keys to ensuring the monarchy remains relevant, accessible, and enduring." William's expression tightened, his sense of duty as clear as ever. Beside him, Catherine reached for his hand, her quiet strength a steadying force. Andrew continued, now addressing Anne. "To my steadfast daughter Anne, you have been the rock of this family. Your dedication, loyalty, and quiet strength have been a source of stability in times of upheaval. You embody the values that define this family, and for that I am eternally grateful." Anne's face remained composed, but her eyes shimmered slightly, a rare glimpse of the deep emotions she so often kept hidden. She gave a small nod, acknowledging her mother's words without fanfare, as was her way. The next section brought a slight pause in Andrew's delivery, his gaze flickering briefly to Charles before returning to the document. "To this family, I leave a simple yet profound wish, that you may find unity in the face of division, strength in the face of adversity, and purpose in the service of others. The bonds that tie us together are stronger than any external force, but they require care, understanding, and forgiveness to endure." The Queen's plea for unity struck a chord in the room, the silence now laden with reflection. Harry's name had not been mentioned again, but the words seemed to reach him even in his absence, carried by the unspoken truths they all understood. Andrew's voice dropped slightly as he approached the final lines. "It is my hope that this family will continue to evolve, to grow stronger with each generation. Our legacy is not just the crown we pass down, but the values we uphold, the compassion we show, and the connections we forge with those we serve. Remember always that we are more than individuals. We are part of something greater." The final words were almost a whisper. "My love for this family is boundless, my faith in you unshakable, and my hope for the future eternal." Andrew carefully folded the last page, his hands trembling ever so slightly as he placed it back on the table. The silence that followed was profound, not the heavy, strained quiet of earlier, but one imbued with thought and reflection. Each member of the family sat with their own emotions, their own interpretations of the Queen's final message. Charles was the first to stand, his movements deliberate, his gaze steady as he addressed the room. "Mother's words remind us of the responsibility we carry," he said, his tone measured. "It is not only a duty, but a privilege, one that demands our unwavering commitment." The others nodded in agreement, their expressions a mix of resolve and introspection. For all their differences, the Queen's vision had reminded them of the common thread that bound them together. As the family began to disperse, each retreating to their own thoughts and private reflections, Anne lingered in the room. She sat quietly, the folded papers resting in front of her. For a long moment, she simply stared at them, her mind replaying the words she had just heard. The grand drawing room, once filled with the murmur of voices and the rustle of movement, was now silent. The light from the setting sun bathed the room in a warm glow, casting long shadows across its ornate furnishings. Anne finally stood, her movement slow but deliberate, and gently picked up the Queen's will. As she folded it neatly and placed it back in its envelope, she allowed herself one final moment of stillness. The Queen's legacy was now theirs to carry. It would not be easy, but it had never been easy. With a quiet determination, Anne walked to the door, her steps steady and resolute. The weight of the day had been immense, but so too was the strength her mother had instilled in her. The room fell into quiet stillness once again, the echoes of the Queen's words lingering in the air. Outside, the palace grounds remained serene, the world beyond continuing as it always had. Yet within those walls, a profound shift had occurred, one that would shape not only the monarchy's future but the family's path forward. And in that moment, Anne knew with certainty that the Queen's words would guide them, even in their moments of greatest uncertainty. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.